Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Thank you to the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Conservation organizations play an important role in supporting local farms and food efforts nationwide. In the heart of the Ozarks, this land trust is taking land access for farmers one step further where they're offering affordable land leases. You can learn more about the program and the farm location by contacting 479-966-4666. Information is online at www.nwafarmlink.org. That is nwafarmlink.org. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. And today my guest is Jill Winger of the Prairie Homestead. Jill has taught thousands of people how to cook nourishing homemade meals, grow food in their backyards, and find joy in a simpler, slower life. Her new book, Old Fashioned on Purpose, releases soon and is a rallying cry for a less industrial, more intentional life. Jill, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. I am so excited to chat.
Absolutely. So why do you see yourself as a reverse pioneer?
Yeah. So, I see maybe the original pioneers, or who we consider the original pioneers, as they're going, into the future. There was that whole manifest destiny concept of we're going to conquer the West. We're going to get into that age of technology and forward, and towards progress. And I'm kind of doing the opposite. I feel like I'm forging new territories, but it's really going backwards in a sense, and not in a negative way. More, I see that as a positive way, as, how can I go back to the past and I can grab some of the things that maybe we've left behind as modern humans and bring them forward for a happier, healthier future. So that's how I look at it anyway.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's still pioneering happening. And I think some of it is just, doing things differently over the years and, kind of revolting against the status quo out there. Now, one of the things we were just at the Food Independence Summit here last week, and something I heard from a few different people is how much they feel alone in this whole journey. All their friends are, doing the 9 to 5, buying everything wrapped in plastic at the grocery store. And actually the first chapter of your book is you're not alone. So talk to me a little bit about, what is the homesteading movement right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's very common for us as humans, especially those of us who are compelled to push against the status quo. It is very alienating sometimes in the rest of culture. We're trying to find those people like us, and sometimes it feels few and far between. And so that first chapter, I really wanted to focus on a phenomenon that I've observed in the last number of years, which I found fascinating. And that is what has happened to the homesteading movement after COVID. And it's something I never foresaw. I have been living this lifestyle and sharing this lifestyle since 2010. And I very much was the voice crying in the wilderness at that point. I felt very alone. Like there was no one I knew who had chickens or cows or canning or anything like that. And it's steadily grown, but after 2020, it has exploded. And so I think sometimes people still feel, maybe they don't have friends in their local community that are doing what they're doing or have those mindsets or ideals. But I want people to know that that nudge and that stirring that they're feeling deep inside is drawing them towards these unconventional things. It's very much happening across culture and the world as a whole right now, and they're in very good company.
And I think creating that community for them, or just those events, I think that's one of the great reasons why these events are so popular, is that they can go and meet other people that are doing the same thing they are.
Yeah. And it's really important. Like, I don't live in a community with a ton of homesteaders. I have a few more colleagues and friends now that are doing pieces of the lifestyle, but I still am very much kind of the Lone Ranger. But when I go to those events a couple times a year, I just came back from the Homestead Festival in Tennessee. Man, it just fills my cup. And I think, honestly, for me, that's enough. I would love to have more local homesteading friends or regenerative farming friends, but even just going a couple times a year and being reminded that, hey, this is actually way more normal than I think. There's a lot of people like me. There's a lot of people who I can commiserate with. That's really important.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things too you talk about in your book is returning to our roots. And I think, we talked a little bit about earlier, but what does that look like?
So I think it looks like different things for different people, right? So the way I look at it is, in the last 150 years or so, humanity has raced towards progress. And some of that has been very good. I have to be very careful as I'm railing on industrialism. I'm sitting here in a podcast studio, right, with a mic and an internet connection, and I have all sorts of technology, and I took a hot shower last night. So I'm not against all progress, but we've had this fascination of forward movement towards technology at all costs, to our health, to our land, to our soil, to our communities. And so for me, the idea of returning to our roots is just pausing for a moment. It's not about throwing away all the new, and discarding all the things and driving around with a, horse and wagon or anything. Although if you want to do that, that's cool. I support it.
Yeah.
But it's rather, what did we leave behind? What are those pieces of being human and those pieces of being connected to the land and to the soil and to nature that we have discarded accidentally as we've raced towards industrialism and technology and progress? And so that, to me, it's like going back, it's getting quiet and still for a minute and just examining that.
And I think part of that too, you talk about later in your book about unplugging to connect. And I think you want to expand upon that aspect.
Yes. So, this is something that's a moving target for me as I do make my living on the internet, which is so ironic, and what a crazy juxtaposition. I'm speaking about, old fashioned skills, but I also use technology. And so for me, I find so many things in my life are not this strict black and white. There's so much gray, and there's very few times where there's just two hardcore sides. And it's really about kind of finding the mix in the middle. And so, within that, I am using technology, but I also am highly aware of the addictive nature of these devices that we're using, especially social media. And as we see it start to transform our culture, I think we're at this beginnings of a transformation in the human brain that we cannot even fathom, as we are now raising children from, birth to be hooked on devices and iPads and phones. And I'm seeing, it's that part, it scares me. Like, we don't know what that's going to do to us long term. And I'm not saying we throw out these devices in their entirety, but I think that as someone who is old fashioned minded, I'm always weighing the benefits with the costs and trying to, and working really hard to keep these devices in check in my life. And so for me, this old fashioned on purpose lifestyle I live really helps me to do that, because it's giving me meaningful ways to connect with nature, which fills a need that sometimes we reach to fill with our phones instead. And it's giving me meaningful things to do with my hands and my brain that we're often, again, using our phones and our devices to fill. And so, it's still a balance. It's still a juggling act for me, but I think that it's a really important way that we can kind of get back in touch with ourselves.
Yeah. Occasionally my wife and I'll go out to dinner, or we're in Costco for, that once a month trip over there.
Yep.
And you see the kid in the basket or in this table, and the family's sitting at a restaurant, eating dinner, everyone on their own device. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, how is that affecting us psychologically, mentally? Even in spiritually, not having that connection that you had, that we were created for. So it's very scary. Yeah. And I mean, yes, me and my wife both have cell phones, and we use them more than we probably should. But that aspect of, just leaving them someplace. And obviously, because we have businesses, we need to be available, but being able to leave them and just unplug for hours at a time is so key. And I just think so healing.
Amen. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest pieces, like you said, it's missing that face-to-face interaction, which studies have shown that our kids need that. They need us to speak to them, not someone on an iPad to speak to them, but they need us to speak to them, and they can hear our inflections in our voice and read our facial expressions and hear us put language together. That's so important for their development. But I also think about, the best ideas historically, and even in my own life, have come from solitude and a little bit of boredom, healthy boredom, where I don't have the input from other people constantly filling my mind. And I look at these children, like some of them might be the ones who, cure major diseases or solve big problems, but they're not getting a chance to just simmer in that boredom. And we're just pumping them full of, frenetic input from all these different sources. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we going to lose in upcoming generations? What problems won't be solved because there's no time to think about things?
Yeah. I'm actually, my wife and I were talking about that specific thing of like, what's the forward of the human race that is being lost because we're all addicted to
Yes.
phones.
Yes,
So
totally.
absolutely. So let's talk a little about consumerism, because you go into that as well. So obviously we're driven to, I mean, with the Amazon culture, and unfortunately it's very convenient, but how is that hurting us as well?
Yeah. And so it's another thing, in my research for this book, I did a ton of reading and studying, and the time period that kept coming to the forefront over and over again was this about 150 years ago, with really when the Industrial Revolution started taking off. And one of the most shocking things to me that I discovered in the research of this book, which maybe to others they'd be like, well, duh. But to me, to really see it in writing was incredible. But consumerism as we know it today is a very modern construct, and we are so, and I mean me included, up until this point, was so indoctrinated in it. I just assumed it was how humans have always been since the beginning of time, that we exist to buy and we exist to consume, and that's couldn't be further from the truth. And you can actually see in the 1920s, and then it kind of picked up again after World War II, where there was very much a concentrated push by the great minds of industry to get the public hooked on this idea of needing more, never having enough, and needing the latest shiny object. And it's not that humans didn't need things before that era, but it was more on they actually needed it just to survive sort of situation. There wasn't this idea of excess and, oh, this is the newest thing, I'm going to throw out this old thing, and that whole throwaway culture idea. And so what we see happening in ourselves, I think, is when we get so hooked into that consumerism ideology, is that we lose a piece of ourselves, and we get kind of on that, what we call the rat race or the hamster wheel of gotta make more money to buy this thing and rinse and repeat. And, it gets very much just soul crushing. And so, not only are we not created to just be consumers, we're created to be producers and creators ourselves, but we're missing out on all these pieces of being human, being connected to nature, growing things, producing things, having a hand in where our food comes from. We miss out on all of that when we subscribe so wholeheartedly to this consumer mindset. And so it's not that I never buy things. I still buy things from Amazon sometimes, much as I kind of try to avoid it, but it happens.
I know.
It happens sometimes, especially when you live rurally. It's like, it's just way easier to get it off Amazon.
Yeah.
But it's also going, how can I'm going to consume. I know I'm going to consume because I do live in 2023, but how can I also be a producer? And I think weaving those two ideas together is absolutely crucial.
Well, I think there's something too about that whole aspect of producing something that is inherent to our self-worth of, yes, I grew this, I made this, I produced this. That's something that I love building. I love creating. And, you stand back and look at the project and like, there you go, it's done. And there's that. Yeah, I think that's the original dopamine hit, compared to when we're just, watching a 2-minute, YouTube video or something. But, it's case in point talking about this is, the phone used to, like, the phone on the wall of your home used to, was 20 years, 30 years, would sit there for 20 years, 30 years, the same phone. I mean, I don't know if we all remember going to our grandparents' house and that phone was on the wall and it was always there our entire childhood. But now we swap out our phones every year, or 18 months or 2 years. So just case in point on that aspect of, moving from thing to thing.
Yeah. And there was, if you look it up, if you Google it, it's called planned obsolescence, where, I mean, people build that in. That was started decades ago, where this idea of like, wait a second, if we build it too good, then they don't have to buy it again. So, I mean, that's built in. And sometimes that's when things are designed to break after a time. And sometimes it's, they train us that, oh, that's out of style, so you don't want that anymore. Yeah. You need the latest iPhone. And so it's fascinating when you start to realize the forces at work. My contrarian self, my hackles go up and I'm like, oh, no, I'm going to do the opposite. So I just like to learn about how it all came to be.
Absolutely. I mean, even like we were at that conference we were at, and it was sponsored by Superb Canning Lids, which are these really, really heavy duty American made. I think they're the only company that is American made canning lids. And, just looking at the quality of that, and it's more expensive, but those lids are going to do the best for you.
Yes.
Now you also talk about escape the human zoo. What's the human zoo?
So, I didn't come up with this term. I found it in some research paperwork, and I'd have to pull it up to get the exact name. I could give it to you for the show notes if you were interested. But a researcher, he called our modern atmospheres, or maybe rather, the environments that we're living in, human zoos, because they're so unnatural in terms of what humans have been living in for the thousands of years prior to the Industrial Revolution, right? And so he says that humans are more malnourished, they're more miserable, they're more depressed, they're more sick than they've ever been. And when we look at the environments that we are in, especially those who may not be as involved in, an agricultural or a farming lifestyle, we're just surrounded by things that humans have made. We're not surrounded by anything natural. And not only does that, I think, leave us feeling a little bit out of sorts mentally, but also physically that can really affect us when we start to look at the effects of artificial light on our bodies, or not being connected or grounded to the earth, not touching soil. Like, there's actually microbes in soil that have antidepressant effects. And there's interesting studies about when we connect our skin to the earth, what it does for us. And so in that chapter, I really wanted to focus on how we can step outside of the zoo for a time, even if you live in the middle of New York City, because I definitely have people who follow me who do not live in Wyoming, that don't live in the Midwest or on a farm. And I wanted to give them encouragement. Like, you can be more connected to nature, into the environment that your body is designed to be in. You don't have to go roll around in the grass naked all the time, but you can do little things that'll bring your body back into that sense of grounding and well-being.
And I think there's nothing wrong with our kids rolling around the grass naked.
And mine do. Mine absolutely do.
Us adults might want a little more privacy than.
Yep.
But yeah, definitely, even like, playing in the dirt. I mean, that is definitely something where, a good day is when the kids need a bath.
Yes. Amen. Yep.
Yeah. So with this, I mean, you teach homesteading, but you also have a couple other enterprises. Let's talk a little bit about them. You have a soda fountain in your small town, Chugwater Soda Fountain. Talk to us a little bit about how did that come to be?
That is a great question, because it was definitely not something that I had foresaw happening in my life. So we were very much devoted to just homesteading and only homesteading from about 2010 till, I guess, about 2020. And that we were very much isolated. We stayed home a lot. I didn't really care to reach out to my community. I make myself sound really horrible, but I mean, it was just, we were friendly, but I was not prioritizing community at all. I was very much prioritizing my business, and we would travel a lot. So I felt like a lot of my contacts were out of area instead of in area. And it worked. Like, I grew the business. It was extremely successful. It was great. It was wonderful. But then I started to have this pull, especially, I think 2020 really kicked it off. And I'm like, man, I have all these skills and this knowledge that I've gained from building this business. And I'm so grateful to have had those experiences. But I really felt like I was kind of neglecting my local area. I feel like I wasn't offering any of those gifts back to my community. And so as we began to make more connections here, my husband and I started to talk, what would that look like if we invested more in our community? Our homestead was doing good. Our businesses were doing good. We felt like pretty solid and secure in those. So we're like, we have these talents that we've been given. How can we invest back? And so I wouldn't say this is the path for everybody, but for us, it was investing in this little tumble down restaurant. We bought it in 2021. It needed a lot of repair. It was in bad shape, but it had potential. And so I saw that potential, and we decided to go after it. And so it has been a big project. It took us about a year to renovate it. It was in bad shape. So we had to go gut it, basically. And then, figuring out staff. And I've never worked in food service. When I was in high school, I cleaned stalls at a horse barn, and I worked at Jiffy Lube. So I've never even worked a waitress job. So I had no clue. So we were figuring out food costs and where to buy food and how to staff. And, it's been a major learning curve. But it's been a gift, even in the hard times, both to us and to the community. And what we've seen happen, we were talking about that community aspect and how important it is just to be face to face with people. For me, it is the embodiment of that for me. And it gets me out of my office. It gets me off of my computer. It gets me away from my own little selfish goals and desires. And it puts me back in a place of being able to connect with community members. And I'm not there every day. We have staff. And so I'll go in a couple times a month and work, or I'll visit, a couple times a week, check on things, but I'm not there every day. But it's been really, really awesome to see that take place.
And with that, what would you say your biggest lessons and takeaways from starting that business have been?
Oh, wow. So many. Restaurants are harder than they look. And I have a new appreciation for anybody who works those sort of jobs. I think that a big lesson has been with these rural communities. There's so much talk about how rural America is dying or rural America is on its way out. And I don't see that to be the case. I think there's so much potential here, but it does take a visionary. And so somebody, if you're, especially, I'm speaking to those living in a rural area, maybe want to see some revival, somebody's got to be willing to stick their neck out. And there's a reason that people don't want to do that, because then you put yourself on the platform for criticism and all the fun things that go with that. But as my husband and I did stick our neck out, we did experience criticism. We have experienced some things that weren't exactly pleasant, but also the rewards on the other side of that, and being the ones to take that responsibility and say, you know what, instead of saying someone should do something about this, we're going to say, we'll be the ones to do something about this, has been one of the most rewarding things I think we've ever done. So it's worth it. It's scary, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. A little bit of, we started our farm, and it's an urban farm, so we're surrounded by 5,500 other people in our little city.
Yeah.
But since we started, that has really been the big catalyst for change. We got in, we argued and fought with the city and discussed with the city for 2 years until I decided to get on the city council. And then that has just really helped push, other big changes. I mean, we now have a completely new staff in our city that is doing things differently. And, that takes someone being willing to come in, stick their neck out, fight a little bit, and make it happen. And it's when you, as you said, stick your neck out, push. It's not always easy. It's not always, there's definitely some people that do not like me.
Oh, amen.
Yeah.
All day long. Like we are. Yep.
But, it's to us, it's important. I mean, we want to raise our kids here. We want to build a community that they are proud to grow up in and excited about. Yes. And part of that is getting rid of ridiculous city regulations. We just passed having chickens available to be had in the city limits. So,
excellent.
That was, it took way longer than I wanted it to be. And it passed on a very narrow vote, but we made it happen. So
it's amazing to me how, yes, it does take a village and it takes a community, but one person who's driven, they can do a lot. And the ways they can start creating is substantial. So I say people don't ever underestimate what you can do and what your grit can accomplish.
Oh yeah. Here's the thing. Most people will just go with the flow. So if you can start your own little mini movement and build if 3 people show up at our city council meeting, that can make the difference between a law passing and a law not passing.
Yep.
It's massive how just a little bit of public pressure makes this massive swing. So again, your vote does count. You are seen, especially on the very small level. National level, it's a lot of times it's just you shrug your shoulders and talk about the military industrial conspiracy theory complex out there, which is not much we can do about it. But on the local level, you can absolutely make change.
Yes, local matters big time.
Yeah. I'm back with Susan from the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust, and today we're talking about one of the holes that we see in the market, and they do as well, with the loss of the local wholesale farm. So Susan, with this project you're working on in Northwest Arkansas, you're open to all different types of farmers, but one of the things that you're actually doing a lot of work around is to kind of rebuild the local wholesale market, right?
Absolutely correct. Northwest Arkansas has a rich history of fruit and vegetable production. It was known for its apples. It was known for grapes and other types of tomatoes, all kinds of really great, produce. But that's been lost over the years for a number of reasons. And we recognize that the demand is there, and we are just trying to, help farmers, both existing and new, understand the potential benefits for wholesale markets and institutional, so schools and hospitals, etc. So there's a lot that's happening within our work to strengthen that local food system. So we now have a food hub that can help aggregate, and part of the work includes a processing facility, state of the art, that will bring buyers and sellers together and also really benefit food entrepreneurs that want to be, making value added products. So this is all a piece of the NWA Food Systems Initiative. And our role as the land trust is to help, preserve farmland and then get farmers on that land access. But there's all these other pieces that are going on to ensure farm viability way into the future.
Very cool, Susan. And if you want to find out more about the work that the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust is doing and the affordable, stable land leases they are offering, you can go to www.nwafarmlink.org or call 479-966-4666. Now, you also have a beef business. Talk a little bit about that.
We do, yes. So that happened. It was a ways into our homesteading journey. And so, with our homestead stuff, it's really just personal food production. And I think that's the case for most folks in that world. It's just about food for ourselves. But then one dream that my husband and I had carried, honestly, I think we talked about it on our first date, was we'd always wanted to be immersed in the ranching lifestyle. And neither one of us had been raised in that world. And so we were, really passionate about how could someday we own land and cattle and be a part of that world. And so as our homesteading progressed and as our businesses progressed, we had this opportunity. And I don't know if this was a wise decision, but it's this decision we made. We're like, we had some extra money to invest. And we're like, well, do we invest it in the stock market or do we invest it back into another business venture? And so we chose to invest it in cattle. And so we bought some cattle from a neighbor. We made a lease agreement on some land down the road from us because we have 67 acres on our personal property, but we needed more than that to run beef cattle. And so we created this relationship, and our goal was to raise farm to table beef. We decided to skip the middlemen. Around us, we live in a ranching world, and they all kind of do that typical model cow calf. You go to the sale barn and, off they go. And we decided to do it a little different. And so that created this company we call Genuine Beef, where we raise grass finished Hereford cattle here just right down the road from where we live. And then we ship that nationwide. So that's been really gratifying. It's been interesting to go from personal food production to commercial food production. Big learning curve, especially with shipping perishable products, was not easy. But yeah, it's been good. And it also, I think for us, it's really a lifestyle business. Like we love having the cattle. We love working the cattle with our children and doing the brandings and, all the things that go with it. And so it's not the biggest part of our enterprise, honestly, just because I haven't been able to put as much marketing power towards it, but it's been a really gratifying part.
Yeah, well, and I think there's always something about having your kids around a business. And, that's one of the reasons we have businesses. And I know the kids sometimes are like, why do we have to do this again? Like, I want to take the week off and go to the lake or something like that. And we're like, well, we're stuck here with the business. And I think it's seasons, it's seasons. And so there are seasons of busyness, and we are starting to really build a cohesive team now. That is giving us a little bit of more freedom, of seasons of freedom. But it also is so important for those kids to understand that from hard work comes being able to go do what you want, that there is going to be that investment. I mean, like it's the cause and effect. I think that if kids really understood that aspect and building that business with them and showing them how it works, and again, showing the real side of farming, there's pain, there's death sometimes. And that makes a much, much more rounded, small human being.
Absolutely. And that's really, honestly, as we've undergone all these crazy business ventures, having our kids at the front row of that has been, I think, one of the very best parts. And it does keep me going on the days where I'm like, oh my gosh, why are we doing this? It's like, nope, they're watching the lessons, and they're grasping these lessons, and they're going to carry that forward. So it's so gratifying.
Now, you also have a blog, theprairiehomestead.com. And I think that's probably a lot of what started a lot of this. And you got some great articles, why good potting soil is important, nutritional needs of chickens, what you've been reading lately. Talk to us a little bit about the blog.
Yeah. So the blog started, so we bought our property back in 2008, and I didn't have aspirations of being a blogger or doing anything online, honestly. It was still that world was still very new at that point. I don't even know if YouTube was really a thing. Facebook was barely a thing. And so I basically just started the blog because we was doing this homesteading stuff, and it felt so novel to me. And it kind of, to bring the conversation full circle, I felt very alone because I didn't have anyone doing anything even remotely close to this. And so I wanted to talk about it, but all my local people, friends and family, were like, ew, like, stop. I don't want to hear about your homemade yogurt. Gross.
Even though it's way more delicious than the store stuff.
I'm like, you don't know how good this is. And they're like, stop talking. Anyway, so I was like, I'm going to explode if I don't tell someone about this yogurt and this garden and my home ground wheat flour. And so I started blogging as kind of this way to, verbally process everything I was doing. And I make it sound short, fast forward 5 years later, and it was a full-time job. That's, there was a lot of stuff in the middle where I kept at it. No one was reading it. I didn't care because it was just for me. And then it started to get traction, and then it started to become more popular. And then I started to realize I could monetize it. And so it became really the foundational piece of what has now become our family enterprises was that Prairie Homestead blog. But it started off very much just as a personal passion project of just sharing my love for this old-fashioned lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And what has the feedback been, especially lately? Like, what are people interested in right now?
Great question. Yeah. So, I'm always, since I am a marketer, I love marketing. I'm always listening to what's the problem, what are the concerns? And, I think recently, it's people are really wanting to break free of the systems. And that really started with COVID. Right around COVID time, the problems I was solving was more tangible. Like, everyone was starting a garden, so they wanted that information. Everyone was making sourdough bread, so they wanted that kind of baseline information. And now a lot of people have adopted those first principles, and they're looking at, how can I break out of more systems, and how can I find that freedom? And do I really have to do things like I've been told I have to do them? And so speaking to that has been, I think, really helpful to a lot of people. It's also fun to talk about on my end, but it's fun to see the homestead culture shift and kind of change over time.
Yeah. So breaking out of the system. So breaking out of the systems of the grocery store, kind of expand a little bit upon what systems are people seeing that they want freedom from?
Yeah. So I kind of think of it in 4 systems. Let me see if I can just rattle them off here at the top of my head without writing them down first. So the first one's definitely food, and homesteading is so much food. So, we talk a lot about that. Another one is just the world of modern medicine. It's not that it's always bad, but sometimes we get into the world of big pharma, and it gets real sticky. So a lot of people are looking at, how can I not only maybe use herbs or other remedies to help my body, but how can I make sure I'm not getting those modern diseases in the first place, those lifestyle diseases?
Yeah. Well, and how to not be addicted to modern farming too.
Yes.
I think that's incredibly important. I mean, I forget what percentage, but it's amazing what percentage of people have a medication subscription that could end their life if they don't have it. And then we've recently seen some massive shortages, and that gets real scary.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. When it's not there, what do you do? And that's, I would love to, Lord willing, not to ever be in that position where I have to have something just to survive. So that's my goal, is to keep my body as healthy as I can. Some things are out of my control. So we're not in that position. Yeah. So medicine's a big one. The education system. I was actually homeschooled K through 12, and we homeschool our children. And so that's been something, I've always been passionate about home education, but like in the last few years, I've really dug into the history of public education and how it came to be. And I think it's fascinating. It's not that I think every single person in the world needs to homeschool or should homeschool, but I think that just understanding our modern systems and their weaknesses, and how we as parents, even if your kids are in public school, how you can kind of adjust for those weak spots in the system, I think is really, really crucial to help our kids become really powerful adults later on. Yeah.
Doing some of the Hornsman research is kind of scary.
Yeah. It's real scary. Have you read John Taylor Gatto at all?
I have not. My wife has. She'll just tell me things, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Appreciate that.
And you're like, oh my goodness. Yeah. It's shocking. I mean, even having been homeschooled, a homeschool graduate, when I read John Taylor Gatto a number of years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea. Like, my mind is blown. It's
a lot of people, they come in, they're like, well, so obviously you had a business degree. And I was like, no, the reason we have what we have is because I didn't have a business degree, because I feel like that shoebox you too much.
Totally.
Like, a business degree tells you, oh, you need to be doing this very specific small-minded thing. You need to be the cog in the wheel, even though you're supposed to be in business. But the background of homeschooling, to me, homeschooling helps you learn to ask the right questions.
Yes.
And when you start asking questions, then you have infinite freedom in your life.
Yes. And I think questions are where it's at. That I'm so passionate about questions and being willing to questioning the systems, if we're talking about systems, is that first step that so many people don't even get to that first step because we've been taught to not ask questions, and that the systems teach us not to ask questions, especially in the educational world. So if we can get to that point, especially and give that to our kids, that is such a gift. Yeah.
I see one of your top books is Sacred Cow, which is awesome. But I think just, thinking about sacred cows in general, and that's one of the reasons why public education is there, is to make sure we don't question the sacred cows of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a side note, we are homeschoolers. We're also helping start a charter school in our little community, in that same cool community with the Soda Fountain. It's a project-based school. And I still don't know how we got into this because it's been quite the hairy project, but like watching as we've gotten into the belly of the public education system at the state level and the county level to get this charter school off the ground. My husband and I have said that the sacred cows that these people hold and protect with their life, it's so fascinating. Like, you do not question them. Like, even our existence as a charter school is so threatening to their cows that they have come after us in the most unbelievable ways possible. But yeah, when I see that, I'm like, oh, you guys are protecting this. Okay, I think it's time to like figure out why this is so sacred and let's poke some holes in it. So that's my personality, which gets me in trouble sometimes, but it also is kind of exciting. So I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to lose the other half of my podcast audience here, but recently there was that a couple different documentaries and a couple different, as I called them, hit pieces on the homeschooling movement.
Yeah.
And I actually did a Facebook post, and I basically put it out there. It's like, this is nothing but a hit piece. And I said, I started just quoting some homeschooling statistics, and how, basically I think it costs, was it $25,000 a year to educate a kid in the public school, but homeschoolers pay, maybe spend $600 on education. I talked about the test scores, and I talked about all this. It's very interesting because I have a wide audience of friends, and I have people that are more than happy to set me right if they feel like I'm wrong. The comments on there there was like none. I think it was kind of shadow banned because, again, of the that, but also they couldn't argue with 30 years of now home education that have 100% shown that it is definitely a superior education system. And I'm sorry if people disagree with me on that. If you're a public school educator, that again, there are some wonderful folks out there in the public education system. There's nothing against them. But I'm saying, if you can afford to, and I don't know if you can afford not to homeschool your kids, to me, it is the biggest change you can make to put your kids in the right direction.
I couldn't agree more. Yes.
All right. So I think we got through 3. What's the 4th system?
Yeah. The 4th system is kind of what I call the 9-to-5 rat race. And I'm not saying everyone should be an entrepreneur. I think some people are not wired to be entrepreneurs. But with that system, I just invite people to rethink. A lot of people hate their jobs. So many people hate their jobs. We have this idea that, you have to go to a job that you just nominally tolerate, and you do your 40 years and then you retire, and that's how it is. And you just plug along. And I just would invite people to rethink that. It's not that everyone should start a business, although I think it's awesome if you do, because I'm very much an entrepreneurial minded person. So I, of course, want everyone to start a business, even, regardless. But I think just rethinking that. Do you have to do something you hate to live? No, you don't. Does it have to be 40 hours a week? Like we've been told, like that is, they're finding now, if you get into some of these more forward thinking companies, like you can get the same amount of work done and you don't have to be there 8 to 5 every single day. You don't have to be sitting in a cubicle every day. There's different ways to get that same amount of stuff done. And so just inviting people to think outside of that system, kind of that factory mindset. And how can you create the life you really want? How can you do something that really lights you up instead of just being a cog in the machine?
Yeah, I think isn't the statistic that most heart attacks occur on Sundays?
Yeah.
Because people are so like, oh, I gotta go back to work tomorrow, and they stress out. So, but yeah, I absolutely, that's another thing I'm super passionate about. And I really actually want to have a conference on that specific thing is, basically the whole aspect of, yes, leaving the system, starting your own business, and the freedom. And yes, it's not easy. I mean,
it's not easy.
The entrepreneurial roller coaster gives you gray hair.
Yes, it
does. But it's also incredibly freeing, and it's also just incredibly satisfying. The impact you can have, and the just understanding what makes business tick and what makes marketing tick, and just being able to understand the psychology of people in a consumer mindset, and just how you can avoid that and live a different and a freeing life.
Yes, it all works together. It all ties together.
Yeah. So the last chapter of your book, which we've been kind of talking through a little bit, is the next frontier. Where are we going?
Yeah. So in that book, I kind of cast a vision of where I hope we're going. I don't know what the future holds. I know there's a lot of, if you go on the internet, especially, a lot of doom and gloom, and a lot of, oh my gosh, the world's ending, it's over, it's done. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I tend to be a little more optimistic maybe than your typical naysayers online. I do see this trend and this obsession in a certain percentage of the populace with the technology, especially as AI and things like the metaverse come about. And I can't help but wonder how far the pendulum has to swing into those entirely artificial existences before we realize that's just not going to work for us as humans. We're still biological creatures. We're still flesh and blood. We're still designed to be in our natural habitats. And so, I kind of play with those ideas on that last chapter. But the conclusion I come to, spoiler alert, is I think that no matter what happens, that I think there's always going to be a measure of the populace who is just obsessed with those ideas. The people who are out there to make a buck, to kind of conquer the world. They want to see us all plugged into the same sort of ideas. And they're always going to be there. They're always going to be that force in the story. But no matter what happens in the coming decades, those old principles that we know to be true, those of working with our hands and being connected to nature and being a producer instead of a consumer and connecting with our communities, those are always going to hold true. That is in the very fiber of our human existence. And so as long as we can lean into those and hold on to those, doesn't mean we still can't play with some technology or dink around with some AI every once in a while. But as long as we hold on to those principles, I think we'll be in a good place. So I think it's crucial that we continue to carry them forward and teach them to our children. So I feel optimistic when I look at the growing tide of people who are wanting to go back to their roots, who are feeling this pull. There's something inside us as humans. If you look historically, whenever things get shaky, we go back to nature, we go back to the land. And it's happening now. And it gives me hope that this rising tide of homesteading people and farming folk and regeneratively minded folks, we're going to be able to just keep things in balance. So that's my perspective, at least.
Well, that is great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Jill. We really appreciate your perspective. And, I think the thing that we've discovered with our farm, again, you're a homesteader coming on more of a farming podcast. And yes, we talked a little bit of business and trying to understand that, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity for farmers to support the homesteading movement.
Yes.
And I mean, we're seeing phenomenal success with, again, our elderberry, willow, comfrey, those plant products are just exploded in our business in the last couple of years. Teaching, on-farm classes, we're seeing a huge demand for the canning, the sourdough, even patio gardening, because there is a lot of people that yearn for this aspect of starting to go down this journey, but they're still stuck in suburbia. So how can we support them, teach them, supply what they need to succeed, and help all of us, as you said, unplug from the system.
Yes. Yeah. And just to speak to those farmers in your audience, I feel like there is so much synergy. And as a homesteader, I'm pretty hardcore. I still don't grow everything. And so I'm always looking for farmers locally or ranchers who can help fill in those gaps of my food purchasing. So I would say if you can find the homestead groups in your area or the homestead people and really figure out how you can serve them and connect with them, it'll pay off in a big way.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jill.
Thanks for having me.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.